So you've heard the Kalam cosmological argument, which traces back causality in the universe to say that it had a beginning, and because it had a beginning, it must have had a cause. And maybe you've heard of the fine-tuning argument, which says that the probability of this universe having life-permitting constants is so astronomically small that it's way more likely that it was designed. And perhaps you've heard the historical evidence for the resurrection, and how it compelled both followers and enemies to be so convinced of Jesus' resurrection that they were willing to die for it. But you want something new. An argument willing to go out on a limb, play at the limits of what an argument can be, and explain what it even means to be God. That's why today I am presenting the modal ontological argument for 1 plus 1 equals 2. You hear me, right? I'm just going to walk through the argument with something as simple as 1 plus 1 equals 2 to give you a feel for how the argument works, and then we'll show how this argument is used for the existence of God. Let's get started. Premise 1. It is metaphysically possible that 1 plus 1 equals 2. First, let's discuss what it means for something to be metaphysically possible. To do that, let's differentiate between 3 different tiers of possibility: epistemic possibility, logical possibility, and metaphysical possibility. The first kind of possibility is epistemic possibility. When we say that something is possible, this is usually what we mean. It deals with our confidence about a claim. When we flip a coin, we say it's possible it comes up heads. If you don't already know, you could say it's possible that the 1 billionth digit of pi turned out to be 6. If we don't know one way or the other, and we don't have any reason to rule anything out, we can use this type of possibility. Logical possibility is a stricter form of possibility, the kind of possibility that rules out contradictions. It says you can't have a married bachelor, or a second even prime number. Under logical possibility, which includes mathematics, it is impossible that the 1 billionth digit of pi is 6, because it actually is 9. Mathematics breaks if the pi is anything different. It could be no other way, logically speaking. Now, the strictest form of possibility is metaphysical possibility. It's very similar to and includes logical possibility, but it describes the way things can be in reality. In reality, effects proceed from their causes, and squares can't be circular. Something squares and matches up with the essential aspects of reality, it is metaphysically possible. Now, if say you're uncertain about a metaphysical possibility claim, you can make some funny sentences like, it is epistemically possible that it is metaphysically possible that unicorns exist. But back on topic. We know that it is metaphysically possible that 1 plus 1 equals 2 because it squares what we know about logic and reality, that combining one whole and one whole gives us 2 wholes. If something is metaphysically true, it's metaphysically possible. Hold on to that one. Premise 2. If it is possible that 1 plus 1 equals 2, then 1 plus 1 equals 2 in some possible world. A possible world is a state of affairs where metaphysically possible things happen. Basically, it's some reality that could have existed had things turned out differently. There's a possible world where you ate tacos for breakfast, but not a possible world where there is a square circle. Since it is metaphysically possible that 1 plus 1 equals 2, then there is at least one possible world where 1 plus 1 equals 2. Premise 3. If 1 plus 1 equals 2 in some possible worlds, 1 plus 1 equals 2 in all possible worlds, and it equals 2 necessarily in all possible worlds. Now, that might seem like a big leap to go from it's in some possible worlds to in all possible worlds, or at least it might seem like that if you weren't dealing with 1 plus 1 equals 2. But we have to look at the logical significance of this argument. Let's consider a possible world wherein 1 plus 1 equals 2 in order to introduce a new term, necessity. This is a step up from mere possibility, whereas possibility is contingent on other things. Necessary things do not and cannot vary. They cannot fail to be true. 1 plus 1 is one such statement. It cannot fail to be 2. It is necessary for it to be 2. It's what these words mean. It could be no other way than for 1 plus 1 to equal 2. This hypothetical world could not logically nor metaphysically exist if 1 plus 1 did not equal 2. But if 1 plus 1 is a necessary fact, not contingent on anything in the possible world, it must be the same in other possible worlds. If a necessary fact is true somewhere, by the laws of logic and metaphysics, it is true everywhere. Premise 4 should be a little bit easier. If 1 plus 1 equals 2 in all possible worlds, 1 plus 1 equals 2 in the actual world. Therefore, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And remember, it will equal 2 necessarily. Like I said, this one's pretty simple. If it's in all possible worlds, all possible state of affairs, one of those, let's pick this guy right here. This will be the actual world. In the actual world, like every other possible world, 1 plus 1 will equal 2. Let's look at the argument as a whole. Premise 1 is metaphysically possible, 1 plus 1 equals 2. That's all this premise is saying. It's possible, it equals 2. I feel like we can agree there. There are going to be state of affairs where 1 plus 1 equals 2. And then premise 3, since there's no other way for any world to exist unless 1 plus 1 equals 2, all worlds, including the actual world, have 1 plus 1 equal 2. Now, of course, saying 1 plus 1 equals 2 isn't exactly groundbreaking, but I just wanted you to see the logical structure of this argument. The main takeaway is that we can condense the argument like this. If a metaphysically necessary proposition is possible, it actually exists. Necessary proposition is possible, it's actually true. Though you might not be familiar with all these terms like possible worlds and metaphysical necessity, this is a valid argument, meaning assuming everything in the premises is true, the conclusion will follow. Now that we've run the argument with 1 plus 1 equals 2, as promised, I am now presenting the modal ontological argument for the existence of God. Premise 1. It is metaphysically possible that God exists. Before we can answer if God is logically possible, we have to first define what we mean by God. And by God, we mean a maximally great being, or an MGB for short. Maximally great being. What does this mean? A maximally great being is a being that has all of the great-making properties. This is where stuff like omnipotence or omniscience comes from. That's the brain. Because to be strong and to be knowledgeable are great. They're good. And so a maximally great being will have all the strength and power and all the knowledge. And so on and so forth for all the different great-making properties. And we'll have them to the fullest extent possible. Now, the real kicker is that a maximally great being is defined as necessary. We're baking metaphysical necessity into the definition. That's not cheating, that's defining our terms. The point of the argument is to see if we can prove that such a being exists by first starting with asking if it's possible. After we finish giving the argument with a maximally great being, I'll investigate this claim and address some objections to things like omnipotence and omnibenevolence in the next section of the video. But let's just roll with the premise for now. Premise 2. If it's possible that a maximally great being exists, a maximally great being exists in some possible worlds, just like with 1 plus 1 equals 2, just like with you eating tacos for breakfast. Except, not technically. There is a difference between the tacos case and a maximally great being. Tacos for breakfast is possible, it's contingent on how things turned out. But a maximally great being is not contingent. We're playing in a different ballpark when we discuss necessary facts, like 1 plus 1, or a maximally great being's existence. Nevertheless, if it's possible, then at least one possible world contains a maximally great being. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. If a maximally great being exists in some possible world, it exists by necessity in all possible worlds. Now, that's because that's what it means for a maximally great being to exist. If 1 plus 1 is a thing, it exists necessarily as 2. If a maximally great being is a thing, it exists necessarily by necessity. You can probably see where we're going with this now. If a maximally great being exists in some possible worlds, it exists in all possible worlds. If 1 plus 2 being a necessary fact means it's in all possible worlds, a necessary being of maximal excellence can't exist in just some state of affairs, but not in others. Premise 4. Let's bring this home. If a maximally great being exists in all possible worlds, a maximally great being exists in the actual world. And therefore, a maximally great being, aka God, exists. Altogether, we can see that the logical forms of the arguments are identical. It seems that the linchpins of both are the first premise, that 1 plus 1 equaling 2, and a maximally great being existing are metaphysically possible. The actual existence of these follow unavoidably from that. We can again condense them into the following form. Now hold on, you might say. You never actually defended why I should believe that a maximally great being is metaphysically possible. And you're right, I haven't. I touched on this earlier, but the process for proving a necessary being is possible is more intensive than proving a contingent being is possible. Let's use 3 criteria, hurdles if you will. First, we'll establish that the being is non-contradictory and thus logically possible. Then we need to make sure that this being runs into no metaphysical problems. And then there's a final mystery hurdle. Stick around to see what the final boss of the modal ontological argument is. The logical objection I'll bring is to God's omnipotence. Basically, if we say that God can do anything, then could God create a rock so heavy he couldn't lift it? Or, the far stronger version of the argument,
Could Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he himself could not eat it?
If God can create a stone so heavy he cannot lift it, he cannot lift the stone. Therefore, he is not omnipotent. But if God can't create that rock, that's something he can't do. Therefore, he's not omnipotent. Seems pretty scary, right? Let's take a closer look. The whole objection stems from this definition. God can do anything. If simply we say that God can do anything that's possible, or we say God has all logical abilities, this objection disappears, because a stone too heavy for an omnipotent being, as defined above, is not a coherent sentence. If God can't do it, good, that's not a thing. By saying God has all logical abilities, we remove the possibility of this objection without diminishing God's maximal greatness, because doing these things weren't possible in the first place. God can still do everything possible. He has all logical abilities, but not the illogical abilities. By clarifying that everything can only be expected to mean possible things, we cover a whole bunch of objections to the logical coherence of a maximally great being. Let's consider the first hurdle cleared. If you want to have anything else addressed on this point, leave a comment. Even if God is a logically coherent concept, does that concept square with reality? I'll address what is probably the most common objection to God's existence out there. It doesn't exactly tie into the idea of fundamental aspects of reality, but it definitely has a modal logical flavor to it. In fact, the objection tries to brew a whole contradiction stew. If God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, God is omnibenevolent, but yet evil exists, then we've got ourselves a contradiction on our hands. We can frame it like this. If evil and suffering exist, or even if they are possible, meaning they exist in any world, we've got three options, goes your objection. Either God can't stop all evil, he's not omnipotent, he doesn't know about all evil, he's not omniscient, or he doesn't want to stop all evil, he's not omnibenevolent. Maximally great being will have these omni traits in all worlds, but if evil exists in even one possible world, then the contradiction cascades across reality, and God cannot exist in any world. Because the modal ontological argument tells us God can only exist in all possible worlds or no possible worlds. This objection seems quite powerful, because it forks all three of the omnis inherent to a maximally great being. It even gets a boost from the modal form I just presented. We also can't forget that it can be very emotionally powerful too. But none of that stops the fact this is a false trilemma. The argument assumes that these are the only three options. All Christians have to do, and what Christians have done in the past 2,000 years of its existence, is provide a fourth option. Some reason for evil or suffering existing in a goded world. These are called theodicies. Here's some of them quickly. One of my favorite counters to this objection is the existence of free will. Though free creatures may choose evil, there are goods that cannot be accomplished if our wills were restrained in such a way to prevent evil, such as real love and dedication. In order for the fullest freedom, there must be an environment in which suffering can take place. You could also approach it from a perspective of moral development. You can learn a lot through hardship, and you can grow as a person. Goods like courage and compassion couldn't arise if there was never suffering. Either of these could serve as viable reasons why God would allow evil despite being omnibenevolent, omnipowerful, and omniscient. All you have to do to avoid this argument is to provide a fourth option, and I believe there are ample routes to go down for a theist. But there's always more to say. Let's consider the second hurdle cleared. Now, what is the mystery final hurdle? The challenger that poses the biggest challenge to the modal ontological argument itself. Let me explain. If we revisit the condensed form of the argument, we can mess around with it. We can flip it around. If a maximally great being exists, a maximally great being is possible. The two arguments are the same. If a necessary thing exists, it's possible. But this time, we prove that a maximally great being is possible by proving it exists. In this form, the modal ontological argument doesn't do much, because you need another argument to show that a maximally great being exists. Also consider this argument with its premises inverted. A maximally great being does not exist. Therefore, it is not possible a maximally great being exists. The logic is the same, forwards and backwards, for true and false. No form is more correct than any other. But in the altered forms, it becomes way more clear that the modal ontological argument is not the type of argument that raises or lowers your confidence in the argument, because you will always need some other argument to support its premises. This is even the case with the 1 plus 1 argument. If you think about it, we only knew it was possible that 1 plus 1 equals 2 because we actually know it does equal 2. Though we presented it forward to ourselves, we internally justified it using the argument backwards. We went in 100% confident, and we came out 100% confident that 1 plus 1 equals 2. But if we're only 50% confident in a maximally great being's existence, then what will the modal ontological argument do to raise or lower that. But don't worry, it doesn't have to. The modal ontological argument does not tell us whether God exists. It tells us which God would exist, or what type of God would exist. It and other ontological arguments for God state that God is maximally great or excellent. They ascribe a full list of traits like omnipotence and omnibenevolence. Think of the ontological argument as an armor stand, where you put all your other arguments on. Each one contributes a piece of the puzzle to demonstrating a theistic framework is true. Cosmological arguments defend the necessity of an omnipotent, transcendent being, but don't do much in the way of omnibenevolence. But we do get that with the moral argument. We can get omniscience from arguments from design and transcendent truths. The conception of a maximally great being as put forward by the modal ontological argument puts all of these together. That's the worst of the modal ontological argument. If you stuck with me so far, in which case, why not subscribe, right? You might ask why Christianity fits the bill better than, say, Islam or Judaism. What advantage does the Christian worldview have over the other ones? And my answer? Stay tuned. I'll be making an upcoming video on why arguments for God work a whole lot better for Christianity than any other religion. But let's recap. If you agree that it is metaphysically possible that a maximally great being exists, then we know that a maximally great being, a maximally great God, exists in reality. But not just here, everywhere, in every possible state of affairs. Though the modal ontological argument may not be able to prove God on its own, it lets us put together all the other arguments and show that if God exists, he is woven into the fabric of reality as deeply as 1 + 1 = 2. And that's pretty cool. Oh, by the way, live by the way.